We've been having so much fun, or I've been having a lot of fun with our series that we're doing we called it Sure, Finding Clarity in a Maze of Truth. We started off with What is Truth? I really enjoyed putting that together. What is Faith? The second series, or the second sermon in the series, I enjoyed that as well. Last week, we asked the question, why Jesus? And that was amazing to put together. And then we come to today, why God? So, reviews from the first service. Are you ready for the reviews from the first service? We had some people who their eyes were sparkling all the way through this sermon. And then we had some people said, I just couldn't stay awake today, sorry. Those are the reviews. We're going to do some in-depth study and looking at the universe and why it makes more sense to believe in God and the idea of intelligent design than it makes to try to disbelieve in that. So actually today we answer the question of why believe in God. And is believing in God like believing in the Easter Bunny? Is it illogical and improbable that there would be a personal being out there who created everything and then loves this world and every living creature on this earth? I think the answer to those questions are no. It's not improbable, and it's not like believing in the Easter Bunny to believe in God. When we look at the facts, when we really stop and see what's going on in the universe and the world, when we look at the facts, it's more logical that this is true to believe in God than it is to disbelieve or to not believe in God. So we're going to deal with that today. So one reason I think that former skeptics, and if you've been here for most of these sermons, then realize that at one point in my life I questioned my faith and lost my faith and then came back. And one of the reasons that former skeptics often tend to have a passionate faith is because they've had to fight for it. There's something they've held on to. They've had to work through this process. And then for some that inherit their faith, they've just always believed, raised in a good Christian home and always believed. Sometimes the result is their faith lacks the passion. And so what I want to do is give us a reason today that we can all come up with the arguments, be able to answer questions, and bring passion into our faith, whether we've been a skeptic or whether we've been a believer all of our lives. I want us to understand why we can believe in God. So I'm going to only give you two arguments today on believing in God, and two main arguments that I believe support a belief in a personal God who created the world and who loves us. So we'll start. Are you ready? The first one. The first idea is what we call the fine-tuning argument. And this would be sometimes called the Goldilocks argument. And so the reason we call it that, you remember the story of Goldilocks, right? The three bears? Remember, she goes in and she finds the three bowls of porridge, and one bowl of porridge is too hot, and one is too cold, but one is just right. And then she goes and tries out the beds, and one bed's way too hard, one bed's too soft, but the third bed is just right. So the Goldilocks argument says that the nature of this universe is so perfectly suited, not just for life to exist, but for there to even be matter in the first place, that it's not possible that it happened purely by chance. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Now, actually Scripture, when I go back to the Scripture, I think about that the Scripture talks about this very plainly. When you go to Psalm 19, chapter 19, verse 1, it says this: heaven is declaring God's glory. The sky is proclaiming His handiwork. So we have here the psalmist telling us years ago that if we just look up and look at God's creation, we can see and we can believe, or there is good reason to believe that there is a God who created the heaven and the earth. And then the psalmist also gives us another idea, and this is in 14 verse 1, and it says this: fools say in their heart, there is no God. So both of these verses assert that a belief in God is the only logical belief. It's the only logical belief. So this stability that we take for granted, that our planet, our Earth, and our solar system, and our universe, the stability that we take for granted is a result of many forces of nature that interact with each other in specific ways. And if these interactions had been any different, even to the smallest degree, life and even matter itself would not have happened. So each one of these forces that acts up on the world, and causes the earth to do what it does, and the universe, they're called cosmic constants. So if you're looking for cosmic constants, I'm going to give you a kind of a little idea of what they are. They are things like the speed of light and the strong nuclear force. Forces that we can quantify, but they don't change. And so that's what we're looking at in this. So depending on how you group them, most scientists agree that there are 47 different cosmic constants. And we're not going to look at all 47. And the church said, yay! We're going to look at 4. Okay, I just want to give us a sampling, an idea of what we're talking about. So the first one we'll look at is called the ratio of electromagnetic force constant. Okay, so here's the thing. If this ratio of electromagnetic force constant, if it was slightly greater than it is, even just the tiniest amount, then chemical bonding would be disrupted, and elements any more massive than boron, you can Google that, boron, would be unstable, and life chemistry would be impossible. So here's the case. On the other side of that, if the ratio of electromagnetic force was slightly, even the slightest amount less, chemical bonding would be insufficient for life chemistry. So the chances of this being exactly right and just accidentally getting right is 1 in 10 to the 40th power. Okay, that's a lot of zeros when you think about it. And so for this to be exactly right, for us to sustain life in our universe and for the universe to continue to build, it has to be exactly the way it is, and the chance of that is only 1 in 1/10, or 10 to the 40th power, rather. So let me illustrate how improbable this is. Let's say you had some dimes, and you're going to stack these dimes, and so you took a stack of dimes and you stacked the stack of dimes to the moon. Okay, it's a lot of dimes. And then you would take another stack of dimes, you would stack it to the moon. And you would cover the entire United States solid with dimes, stacks of dimes to the moon. And then you would take in that massive amount of dimes, you would take a dime and you would put a red X on it, and you would put it in there, and you would take your friend, you would blindfold your friend and say, select a dime, and they would select the one out of all those, however many numbers that would be, and they would find the dime with the red X on it, blindfolded. That's the probability of this happening without some kind of intelligent design. Another way of putting this, somebody said that you could stack dimes to the moon and then multiply that times 1 billion, and that you would also get the same, close to the same number, whatever those numbers are. Second, let me talk for a minute about the second cosmic constant. That one is, the second one I'll talk about is the strong nuclear force constant. So if the strong nuclear force constant was slightly larger, the tiniest amount larger, then no hydrogen would form. And so life chemistry would not be possible. Realize how important hydrogen is, right? Something about the air we breathe, the water we drink, everything that's made of hydrogen is a big part of that. And if this strong nuclear force constant was slightly, the smallest amount less, then there would be no elements heavier than hydrogen would form. And again, there is no life chemistry possible. Look at one more, or a couple more. The third one is the weak nuclear force constant. Now, if the weak nuclear force constant was slightly larger, there would have been too much helium created during the Big Bang when stars would convert too much matter into the heavy elements, making life chemistry impossible. If the weak nuclear force constant was slightly smaller, then there'd be too little helium that would have been produced from the Big Bang, and the stars would convert too little matter into heavy elements, again making life chemistry impossible. This is just one more, just so we get an idea. Gravitational force constant. That's the fourth one we'll look at. If the gravitational force constant, if it was slightly larger, stars would be too hot, they would burn too rapidly and too unevenly for there to be any life chemistry. If the gravitational force constant was even slightly smaller, then stars would be too cool to actually ignite a nuclear fusion. And because of that, then many of the elements needed for life chemistry would never form. And so these are just 4 of roughly 47 variables that if they differ just slightly, it would make life impossible. So how is it that that can happen just accidentally? Stephen Hawking, we all know who Stephen Hawking is, so I'm going to quote Stephen Hawking this morning. He says this: "The laws of science as we know them at present contains many fundamental numbers like the size of the electric charge of the electron in the ratio of the masses of the proton and the electron." Punch your neighbor and say, "Wake up." The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. I had one person come to me after church and said, "I disagree with Steve Hawking." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "I don't think God had to adjust anything. I think God got it right the first time." But even Stephen Hawking is saying that somehow there's something that's gone on. There has to be something that has set this, because it's too remarkable, too impossible to have happened by chance. So with our high-powered telescopes that we have, it tell us that the universe is expanding, and what we thought were empty spaces, in just the last very few years, we found out that there's all these things going on in the universe, even in the expansions that we thought were just void. And then conversely, astronomers estimate that 13.6 billion years ago, all matter was super condensed into a ball about the size of a quarter. Now, can you imagine all of us in here being condensed in the size of a quarter? Try getting on an airplane, and you about get close to that, okay? Or get all of us on there. Now, seriously, how about everything in Bartlesville, buildings, everything in Bartlesville is being condensed into the size of a quarter. Now, think about our world. Now, the Earth is not even a speck. When you look at our universe, it's so small. And yet all of that, they say, was super condensed in the size of a quarter. At some point it exploded, and this is known as the Big Bang Theory, right? Now, nobody knows where the ball came from and why it exploded when it did, but that is the currently accepted theory of the beginning of the universe. So, in this Big Bang scenario, you don't have that many opportunities to get it right. It's like it happens once, and it has to be right that time. So you have one chance of the universe being set just the way it is. One chance, because Big Bang happens one time. And the odds that it would be just the way it is, so that matter and life could exist, it's nearly infinitely unlikely. It just can't happen in the reasonable mind. Now remember the stack of dimes before. So you have this, if for each one of these constants to be right, it would be like a stack of dimes the size of the United States going to the moon. You do that, and then you multiply that times 47 to get all of the cosmic constants together. And you can see how, and then find the dime with the red X on it, blindfolded, accidentally. You see why it's just understandable how that this could happen without some kind of intelligent design. So the Big Bang scenario. You don't have that many opportunities to get it right, so you're doing this. So you don't have to be a believing Christian, I don't think, to see how convincing it is for the existence of God, an intelligent design. And matter of fact, the astronomer Fred Hoyle says this. He says, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces we're speaking about in nature. No blind forces, no accidents. The numbers that one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. It's not even something you need to argue with. It's just the question can't even come up that it can happen without intelligent design, without a God being there. So another way to imagine this is to think about dice. Now, I didn't bring my dice today because I didn't want you to think I ever mess with them, but my dice are all Harley-Davidson dice, so that's okay, right? So I have some dice at the house, and so if you take this dice and you roll a 3, what is the chance that you're going to roll a 3 when you roll the dice? 1 in what? 6, because there's 6 sides, okay? So if you roll that die twice in a row, your chances of rolling a 3 both times are what? Be 6 times 6, so it would be 36, right? Okay. So if you're going to roll the 3 6 times, your chances are, anybody know this number? 6 times you're going to roll 3, your chance is 1 in 47,000. Okay, 1 in 47,000. So when people keep rolling winning numbers time after time after time, that's the reason they throw them out. There's something wrong. Something's been monkeyed with there. Okay? So now, imagine the die, the big dice, and it has, instead of 6 sides, it has 10 to the 40th power sides on this die. Okay? And you roll a 3, not once and not twice, but 47 times you come up with the exact same thing. The numbers are staggering. They don't make sense in our lives because it is so unlikely it doesn't make any sense at all. It's just that the numbers are so minuscule that we can't even understand them. And so the only way you can get around this incredibly unlikely perfection is what it takes for our world to exist. Pardon me. Is to think that maybe there's more than one universe. Okay? So it'd be like being more than one dime with red marks on it in the stack of 1 million miles, to the moon and then 1 million times further. So if there were, infinitely more universes, then it isn't hard to believe that maybe one actually came up right if there are a whole lot of universes. But there's no evidence mathematically or otherwise to believe in multiple universes. Matter of fact, frankly, it's just much more likely that God exists. You understand what I'm saying here? Just to not believe in God doesn't make sense at all. So the second idea. The first idea was the cosmic constants, the fine-tuning. So the second reason that belief in God to believe in God is more philosophical. It's the anthropologist theory of why to believe in God. So we talked about people who lose their faith, and people who lose their faith often get quite miserable. They get depressed because after believing in God, and they start looking at what it means to not believe in God, then the nothingness of that gets so empty, and it's even more than empty. It's like a vacuum where there's just absolutely nothing in there, nothing at all, no air, no anything. And it's depressing. It wears you down. And so if you want to look for motivation for living or doing good, or it's hard to find if you choose not to believe in God, because we're all just going to die anyway, right? There's really no intelligent design. We just accidentally got it right, and I accidentally showed up, and the universe is expanding all the time, and everything's going to die and all the stars die, there'd be no more energy in the material world that we live in. If there's no God, then there's ultimately no point anyway. And so how do you get out of bed in the morning? And that was a question I had to ask myself at one time. How do you do it? What's the purpose? Yeah, I was once told by somebody else who decided they didn't believe in God. They said, well, you know what gets better? You kind of get used to it. And I'm thinking, why do I want to? And then, you learn to live with it or just die with it, whatever. And then there was a person that I was reading last week that when they were struggling with this idea of is there really a God, they received the recommendation from an unbelieving professor that they had to read a book called it was by Albert Camus, called The Myth of Sisyphus. I'm not going to say it very many times because I know I'll get it wrong and it's not going to be pretty. So, in this myth, a man named Sisyphus is cursed to roll a large boulder up a hill until he gets to the peak, and then the boulder rolls down the other side. And then he gets behind it and he rolls it up the next hill until he gets to the peak, and then it rolls down the other side. And then he gets behind it and rolls it up you get the idea. And he's to do that for eternity. That's what he's been cursed and required to do for his entire, for eternity. And so, Camus, the writer here of this myth, basically concludes that although there's really no point to life at all, we're material, there's no God involved, no intelligent design, because even though there's not that, you go forward and you keep living because it has dignity, and to do otherwise would be cowardly. So that's Camus's point behind his myth, called the myth of Sisyphus. That's the last time. But I really think, in my mind, as I thought through this process, I really thought, this is a really terrible argument, because where do you get the idea of dignity in the first place? In a material world, when all there is just stuff, there's no God, ideas like dignity and cowardice and good and bad, they're all human constructs, and they really don't have any ultimate meaning. There's no real benefit or non-benefit for doing or not doing any of those things. And the fact that we're even framing such questions of purpose and meaning, or the lack thereof, or using words like dignity, it's all circular. It just has no meaning. It just goes and goes and goes, and there's nothing really to it. And in addition, Camus believed that humans are, and this is a paraphrase, but he believes that all of humanity are freaks of nature. That we ended up with this sense of self-awareness, and this sense of self-awareness tortures us and torments us with a longing for things to which there are no corresponding answers. We long for things that there's no way, there's nothing there, but we long for something that's not there. And so our desire for God, our desire for ultimate meaning and purpose in life, our desire to be a part of something beyond this life, for something eternal, or just our desire for a higher power, all these things that humanity has craved since we first gathered around the thing called fire back in the Stone Age, all those things, he says, have no corresponding answers. There's nothing there, and it's just human constructs. Or constructs, excuse me. But how could we have evolved from the first single-cell organism into creatures that long for something that never exists? It would be like people who live in the desert. They've lived there all their lives. They've had no contact with outside. They've lived in the desert, the heat and the sun all their lives. And suddenly, inexplicably, they decide, they find some materials and they start shaping it, and they come up with this design that we would know today as snow skis. And they would get this inexplicable desire to go snow skiing, even though they've never heard of it. There's nothing in the world they've ever seen like it. All they know is a desert life. And they do that because, that's what this would be like. But you know what really happens is when they get something, they find out how maybe grow a plant that has a leaf large enough they can get under for shade, or they put together some animal pelts after they eat the animals, and they put it over them for shade or around them for protection. That's what really happens. They don't find something that has nothing to do with life at all and just decide inexplicably that they just have to do this thing. Nature evolves beings who have needs for which there are answers. That's the way it is. So in his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis describes it this way, and I've used C.S. Lewis several times in this, but he says this: creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires really exists. A baby feels hunger. Well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim. Well, there is such a thing as water. Men feel sexual desire. Well, there is such a thing as sex. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. You see, the fact that we long for God means that there must be something out there to correspond with that longing. And aside from this, the next best option, other than there being a God that we long for, aside from this, the next best option is just to get used to it and stop thinking about it. Well, that's a pretty unsatisfying option, in my opinion. And not only that, but it makes the least amount of sense when you look at the world around you. It's far more likely that there is a God who is rational, intentional, and moral, who created us and the world, than there is that that's not the case. This is the blueprint from which we were made. Let me close with this. The practice of apologetics, and this means being able to defend your faith. The practice of apologetics is a kind of discipleship of the mind. The facts are that either our reality is far more miserable than we can possibly comprehend or admit, or it's in fact far better than we can possibly comprehend or admit. And we have reasons, historically, scientifically, and philosophically, that all point to the actual reality that a loving God made us, and that all things for the purpose of union with Himself through Jesus Christ, all things are made for that reason. And it's not just incredibly good news. Remember this, it's not just incredibly good news that that's the case, but it's the most likely scenario to be true.